Why you need to stop thinking. Alan Watts explains the power of silence. Let's start with a paradox. The more you think, the less you understand. That sentence might seem absurd, even dangerous, in a world that glorifies intellect, analysis, and strategic thinking. We are taught from the very beginning that thinking is what separates us from the animals. It's what makes us human. But Alan Watts, the philosopher who danced between Eastern and Western ideas like a jazz musician, bending the rules of rhythm, offers a radically different view. He invites us into a space most of us fear, a space of silence, of stillness, of not thinking. And here's the hook. What if the very thing preventing you from understanding life, from feeling at peace, from experiencing reality fully, is your constant need to think about it? Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a vast, still lake. If the surface is disturbed, you get ripples. If you throw a rock in, you get chaos. But when the water is undisturbed, it reflects everything perfectly. That's your mind. That's what silence offers. But most of us never experience it, because our minds are always churning. Not just during the day, but even at night. Thoughts about the past, fantasies about the future, worries about things that haven't happened, regrets about things that already did. We are addicted to thought, and we don't even know it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Alan Watts used to say, "A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts." Let that sink in. If your thoughts are only about other thoughts, you're in a loop, a recursive, self-referential echo chamber. You're no longer in contact with the world, you're in contact with your own commentary on the world. That's why we struggle to be present. That's why we miss the beauty of a sunset, the silence of a forest, the quiet intimacy of just being with another person without needing to say anything. We're not there. We're in our heads, performing, analyzing, judging, planning. Note over. But what if thinking is only a tool and not the master? What if the real wisdom comes not from the thoughts you produce, but from the space between them? Watts believed that silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of something deeper, something beyond language, something sacred. And that silence is where the rhythm of the universe becomes audible, not in words, but in the pauses between them, like music, which is not made of notes alone, but the gaps between notes. Try to imagine music without silence, just an unbroken stream of sound. It would be unbearable. In the same way, life without silence, without mental stillness, is unbearable too. It's a kind of spiritual noise pollution. So here's a question. When was the last time you truly experienced silence? Not just around you, but within you. No running commentary, no internal debate, just presence, stillness. Most of us have never truly arrived at that moment because we're afraid of what we'll find there. In silence, the ego disappears. And that's terrifying. Because the ego, your sense of I, thrives on narrative. I am this, I was wronged, I will succeed. But silence doesn't care about your story. Silence dissolves it. That's why it feels uncomfortable. That's why we fill every waking moment with stimulation, music, podcasts, news, notifications. It's not information we crave, it's distraction from the silence. But what if that silence isn't empty? What if it's where reality actually begins? Watts often compared the mind to muddy water. The more you stir it, the cloudier it becomes. But if you let it settle, clarity, stillness reveals truth, not logical, analytical truth, but experiential truth. The kind you can't explain, only feel. The kind that doesn't arrive through thinking, but through being. So the goal isn't to stop thinking by force, that's just more thinking in disguise. The goal is to create space, to become the observer of your thoughts, not the prisoner of them. And here's the twist. When you stop trying to think your way through life, life starts to reveal itself. You see things as they are, not as your mind says they should be. You respond instead of react. You feel instead of interpret. You begin to notice the texture of reality, not just the names you've given it. Alan Watts didn't want you to abandon thought. He wanted you to stop identifying with it, to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that hears them. So what does that mean practically? It means practicing silence. Not just external silence, but internal. It means sitting in a room without picking up your phone. It means walking without music in your ears. It means allowing a moment to pass without filling it. And in doing so, you begin to hear something else. A deeper signal beneath the noise. You begin to touch the ground of being, the space where joy, peace, and wisdom naturally arise. Here's the challenge. Can you sit for 5 minutes and do nothing, not even think, not try to meditate, not try to be spiritual, just be? No goals, no effort, just silence. And if you can't, ask yourself why. What are you running from? Because the answer to that might change your life. The thought trap. Why your mind's constant chatter is keeping you from living. We often mistake the voice in our head for who we are. That running monologue, that inner narrator constantly analyzing, comparing, judging, planning, it never seems to stop. And yet most of us never question it. We don't ask where it comes from or why it's always talking, we just assume it's us. But Alan Watts reminds us that this voice is not your essential self. It's just a function of the mind, like a radio that's always on, whether you're listening or not. And here's the trap. If you never learn to turn it down, you'll never hear anything else. Not life, not love, not even your own intuition. You see, the mind is a phenomenal tool, but a terrible master. When you use thought purposefully, when you need to solve a problem, make a plan, create something meaningful, it's powerful. But when it uses you, it becomes a tyrant. It drags you into the past, rehashing old failures and imaginary conversations. It flings you into the future, worrying about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. It never lets you rest, never lets you be. And the saddest part, most of us don't even realize this tyranny is happening. We think it's normal. We think this is life. But it's not. It's a simulation of life. A filtered, compressed, and heavily edited version of reality. You're not seeing the world, you're seeing your thoughts about the world. And that difference is everything. Alan Watts said, "We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society." Such a radical idea. The very language you use to think is borrowed. Your concepts, your assumptions, your values, they've been shaped by culture, by conditioning, by others. So what happens when you stop thinking for a moment? When you stop running the program? You begin to see what's actually there. A tree is no longer a tree. It becomes this living, breathing presence that you feel, not label. A person is not a friend or enemy, not a role, but a being with mystery and complexity beyond your mental categories. And you are no longer a story. You are no longer, "I'm this kind of person, I've had this kind of life." You're just here, alive, free. And that is where the real living starts. But let's be honest, it's not easy. The mind doesn't like being quiet. It craves activity, stimulation, control. It wants to run the show. It believes that if it stops thinking, everything will fall apart. That's the illusion. In truth, the opposite happens. When you introduce silence into your life, even in small doses, you begin to experience a strange kind of clarity. Not the clarity of answers, but the clarity of presence. You stop needing to explain everything. You stop needing to judge everything. You start to trust the flow of life. What's often pointed out that the universe doesn't think its way into existence, it flows. Rivers don't think about where they're going. Trees don't strategize how to grow. The stars don't plan their orbits. They just are. And we, as part of that same universe, have that capacity too. The capacity to act without overthinking, to live without overanalyzing, to be peaceful without constantly trying to become. But to do that, we have to let go of our addiction to mental noise. Now let's get practical. Start noticing the thought patterns that dominate your day. How often are you replaying old scenes? How often are you imagining future ones? How often are you mentally arguing with someone who isn't even there? That's not life. That's thought. And it's not evil or bad. It's just not the whole picture. The more you observe those patterns without judgment, the more space you create around them, and in that space something incredible happens. You begin to experience life directly. Here's a tough question. What would be left of you if all your thoughts disappeared, even for a moment? Not your memories, not your plans, just you, raw and unfiltered. Would you still be you? Or would something deeper emerge? Something more real? That's the mystery Alan Watts invites us to explore. Not by thinking more, but by thinking less. By stepping out of the current of constant mental chatter and into the stillness from which everything arises. Because in the end, thought is just the surface. Silence is the depth. And only in the depth can we truly understand what it means to live. Beyond the mind, discovering the self that exists before thought begins. Let's go deeper. Beyond the mind, beyond the chatter, beyond even the sense of I that clings to our thoughts like a shadow. Because if we stop identifying with the voice in our head, if we truly step back and observe it, we begin to encounter something strange, something unfamiliar, yet profoundly intimate. a presence, a spacious awareness that sees the thoughts but is not made of them, that hears the noise but isn't disturbed by it, that watches the mind flail and fight but remains still. That is you, not the you with a name, a personality, a story, but the deeper self, the one that exists before thought begins and continues after it ends. Alan Watts often spoke of this original self, the one you were before you learned to think about yourself, before you were told who you are, how the world works, and what to believe. This deeper self is not an object to be grasped. It can't be described, labeled, or captured in a concept. It is the subject of all experience, the witness. And here's the paradox. You can't see it the way you see other things. You can only be it. You can only rest in it. You have to stop trying to know it with thought and instead realize that you are it already. But in our culture, we are taught to build an identity through thinking. We construct an image of ourselves, a resume, a personality, a set of beliefs, and we cling to it like a life raft. We think that without that mental structure, we would be nothing. But Watts challenges that fear. He says the self is not a thing, but a process, not a noun, but a verb. You are not a static identity. You are an unfolding. It's a happening, a dance between awareness and form. And when you stop thinking, even for a moment, you don't vanish. You expand. You discover that who you really are cannot be located in space or time or description. Have you ever had a moment where time seemed to stop, where you were so immersed in the present, watching the ocean, staring at the stars, holding someone you love, that thought disappeared entirely? No commentary, no narrative, just being. And yet, in that moment, you weren't confused or lost. You felt more alive than ever. That's the self beyond the mind. That's the place Watts called the deep now, the eternal present where reality actually lives. Not in the past, not in the future, not in the static identity you've been rehearsing all your life, but right here, right now. And here's a question that seems simple, but can shatter your mental framework if you take it seriously. Who are you when you're not thinking? Not who do you think you are, not what have you been told you are, but who are you in the absence of thought? Can you even answer that? Who are you? Who are you in the absence of thought? Or does the question itself reveal how dependent we've become on mental labels? This is where silence becomes not just peaceful, but revolutionary, because in silence, the ego has nothing to hold on to, no praise to seek, no image to defend, no script to follow, just presence. And that presence is terrifying to the ego, because the ego knows it cannot survive without a story. But you don't disappear, you remain. In fact, you shine more clearly, you feel more connected, you become more real, because the ego is not your enemy, it's just a tool that has forgotten it's a tool. Thought is not the problem. It's the identification with thought that keeps us trapped in a loop of suffering. So how do we live from this deeper self? How do we remember the silence beneath the noise, even as we move through a noisy world? We practice, not in a rigid, dogmatic way, but gently. We pause, we breathe, we notice the gap between thoughts, we rest in that gap even for a second, and gradually we realize that the silence is always there, like the sky behind the clouds. The clouds come and go, but the sky doesn't move. That's your true nature. That's the self before thought. Alan Watts said, "The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real, deep down you is the whole universe." That's not a metaphor. That's an invitation. An invitation to see yourself not as a separate thinker, but as the awareness in which all of life unfolds. And the only way to remember that is to stop thinking long enough to see it. So, I'll ask again. What remains when you stop thinking? Find that, and you'll find everything. Power of silence, how stillness awakens clarity, creativity, and inner freedom. In the end, silence is not something we achieve, it's something we return to. It's not an absence we fear, but a presence we've forgotten. Our world is addicted to noise, not just the external kind, but internal noise. Opinions, judgments, plans, worries, calculations. We are bombarded by thoughts every moment, and we've come to believe that this mental chaos is normal. But Alan Watts reminds us that silence is not the enemy of awareness, it is its very foundation. He shows us that in stillness, the mind becomes transparent, and through that transparency, life flows in. When you stop thinking, you don't become stupid, you become open. You stop filtering reality through a conceptual lens and start experiencing it directly. Clarity doesn't come from more analysis, it comes from less interference. Think about it. When have your best ideas come to you? Is it during a forced brainstorming session, or while walking in nature, taking a shower, or staring at the sky? The mind, when quiet, becomes creative, not in the frantic way we associate with productivity, but in the way a tree grows, naturally, without effort, aligned with life itself. Silence also brings freedom. As long as thought is compulsive, you are not free. You are ruled by every passing idea, every intrusive memory. But in stillness, you gain distance. You realize you can observe your thoughts without being caught in them. That gap is the birthplace of freedom. You begin to respond, not react. You choose rather than follow unconscious momentum. You become the master of your attention, and from that mastery, all transformation begins. But the most beautiful gift of silence is presence. You begin to feel again, not just emotionally, but existentially. You become aware of the breeze on your skin, the sound of birds, the rhythm of your breath. These things were always there, but thinking drowned them out. In silence they return, and with them, a sense of connection to the moment, to yourself, to the mystery of existence that no thought can ever explain.